Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is the short season, just trying to make sense of it all. There are so many theories when it comes to Satan's little season that is mentioned in Revelation 20. And by now, there are a large number of people who believe that the short season spoken of is a reset. And that certainly does make sense. There have been multiple resets, in my opinion, in our past, and the short season would definitely qualify as one of them. The problem is trying to reach a consensus on what specifically that entails. And you know what? We will likely never reach a consensus on this because there is no way that we will possibly ever know ourselves that we are correct. I know a lot of people are very, very, very confident in their opinion and they think that they know specifically how everything went or will go during the little season. But what I'm going to tell you is that no one can be 100% correct because we simply just don't have any way to know that. So you might be overly confident, but just rest assured that there are other people who have a completely opposite opinion of you who are as equally confident as you are. So keep that in mind when you are insisting that you are 100% correct, which is why I refuse to come out and say, okay, this is it. I have it all figured out. Because you know what? I don't have it all figured out. That's why my series is called Question the Narrative, not Solve the Narrative. One of the most intriguing things to me regarding the short season is the question of who were the inheritors? And I have been mulling this over for quite a bit of time. I've been taking notes in my book that I carry with me, and I've just kind of been sitting on it because I didn't want to come out with a video right away in case there were any other pieces of information that came to my attention. So I waited on this, and I'm glad that I did because I have realized that there are actually multiple scenarios that I have come up with for how this could have possibly happened. And just because I'm saying it here doesn't mean these are the only scenarios. These are just the scenarios that I have thought of. So a lot of people believe that the inheritors were the resurrected people after the millennial kingdom, the rest of the dead, as they are referred to in Revelation 20. So it's specifically Revelation 20, verse 5. It says, "The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection." So some people believe that after the millennial kingdom ended and the short season began, the rest of the dead were resurrected, and that those people who were resurrected, and possibly some of those who were living during the millennial kingdom and came out of the millennial kingdom, they could have been the inheritors of this new reset society. And let me just say, first off, that no matter who the inheritors were, this was obviously a glorious time to live if you just look at the architecture and even the composure of the people who were living during those times. And yes, entropy has certainly occurred in our society and we as human beings, and we are not where we once were. And this is evidence of that, just these photographs. Among the people who believe that the inheritors were the rest of the dead who were resurrected, they also believe that we who are living today are possibly the descendants of those people, in addition to anyone else who may have come through the millennial kingdom who did not have to be resurrected because they were still living. But when it comes to the actual rest of the dead, the resurrected, I do have some issues with the notion of them being able to procreate. You know, we aren't really given any information on the sort of bodies that the rest of the dead had when they were resurrected. So, were they resurrected with their resurrection bodies? I'm not really sure, but if they were, that's where I take the most issue with them being able to procreate because I'm just thinking, did they then continue to age or did they live and remain the same age? Did they die again? Because that's another issue that I have is just the fact that if the rest of the dead were resurrected after the millennial kingdom, would God then allow them to die yet again before the white throne judgment, or are these people still living amongst us today? Hebrews 9:27 tells us that it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. And this is actually a verse that is used to refute, I can't think of the word, reincarnation. It's a verse that is used to refute reincarnation, but if we think about this, we could also use this to possibly refute the idea that I'd say millions of people were resurrected after the millennial kingdom only to go on living their lives again and then die again before being raised a third time or a second time for the final judgment. So you see that just it doesn't make sense to me. I will say though that when it comes to having babies, could the rest of the dead be resurrected? As I've always assumed that Lazarus was resurrected, I always assumed that when Jesus brought him back to life, that he just continued on then living the rest of his days and then died again. I never really thought about it. But I certainly wouldn't think that he would have a glorified body when he was resurrected, because he was not resurrected after Christ had already been resurrected. So that's a question. Could these rest of the dead have bodies like Lazarus's, and then would that enable them to age and to bear children? But again, and even with Lazarus, I'm just thinking, all right, did he then die again? But I think it makes a huge difference in that Lazarus had only been dead like 2 days, and then he was brought back to life. So it was almost like he was kind of, just think of it as like in a coma or something like that. Whereas if there were people who were dead for thousands of years and then were resurrected, I think that makes a huge difference in them then continuing on with their progression of life, and then, like many people think, bearing children. But then I start to think to myself, okay, well, is that where all of these Cabbage Patch babies and orphan train children could come into play? Perhaps the inheritors, the resurrected dead, were not able to procreate and were children more or less grown. One person who left a comment on my channel last week proposed that they could be homunculi, which I had to look up. I had heard of the term, but I wasn't specifically sure of what they were. So, a homunculus is a representation of a small human being, originally depicted as small statues made out of clay. Popularized in 16th century alchemy and 19th century fiction, it has historically referred to the creation of a miniature, fully formed human. The concept has roots in Preformationism as well as earlier folklore and alchemic traditions. So, could the Cabbage Patch Babies be that? I'm going to be the first to tell you that I have not really looked into the Cabbage Patch Babies a whole lot yet. It intrigues me, but I have so many things coming at me all the time that I don't even know which way to turn in terms of research. But I will get to that at some point. But that does have me wondering about these babies. Another thought that I actually had regarding the Cabbage Patch Babies and the orphan train children is, could they have been the children and the babies who were resurrected, the rest of the dead? And what would that have been like? If something like that had happened, what would that have been like to suddenly find all of a sudden, what if somebody walked out and they had all of these infants lying in a field outside of their house? Would it give an impression of something like a cabbage patch? Is that where that came from? And the orphan train children, again, could they have been resurrected children? Because you have to know that when there is another resurrection, whether it happened already or not, there will be children and infants in there as well. And if that's the case, then certainly they would seem to have bodies that were not glorified bodies at that time, because I can't see infants being resurrected just to not continue on living and growing and to more or less be helpless, not having anyone to take care of them. So See, this is why I've taken so long to talk about this topic, because there are so many issues that we really need to think about. It certainly would be feasible, though, because we know that technology was likely far more advanced than what we have been told that it was. Is it likely that these children may have been, we'll say, lab grown? I don't really like that term, but could there have been some sort of scientific method been used to have these babies that, we have all of these photos of the infant incubators at the World's Fairs with living infants. And someone said, "What do they mean, living infants?" And I honestly think that what they just mean is that they're not empty incubators. You're not going to go in and find empty incubators. I don't think that it means anything, worse than that. But look at the way they're handled like they're little dolls. And yeah, it almost does seem like an assembly line of children. And here, this is also at a World's Fair. And I know that there were infant incubators at the Coney Island World's Fair as well. So here we have infant incubators. Does this all tie in together? It certainly seems like it might. And I know that it's a grandiose notion that those of us alive today could possibly be the descendants of the rest of the dead who were resurrected after the millennial kingdom. Again, I still have a hard time coming to terms with, if these people were able to have children, they would have then passed away again, and then they would have to be resurrected again at the white throne judgment. So to me, I, yeah, I just can't see that possibility happening. So if the rest of the dead were not the inheritors, and if they were resurrected after the finish of the millennial kingdom, where could they be? Well, they could possibly be at the camp of the saints, which I am beginning more and more to believe is at the North Pole. And if that's the case, if these resurrected believers were raised and were sent to the camp of the saints, could it be the the survivors who were kind of left then to continue on, and they would be the people who were left over to take, I don't want to say take charge, but to live after, in this short season, after this reset period, during this reset period. So then that gives us another line of thinking, because if these people who lived through the millennial kingdom and now are just living through the short season, I would say probably unbelievers who lived through the millennial kingdom, then they would not have been resurrected. They would have just continued on living, and then possibly could we be their descendants? I would say that that is more likely than the descendants of the rest of the dead. And that leaves us with another way of looking at the orphan trained children and the babies in the infantoriums. And that is just, were these the children of those who came out of the millennial kingdom and, wouldn't keep their mouths shut about what happened, and how the millennial kingdom had already happened, and that Christ had already ruled on the earth, and they didn't want people to know that. And so were these people then put into these lunatic asylums, and were their children and their infants taken from them? That, I think, that is another huge possibility. And if you look into the history of these lunatic asylums, I've done a video on them already. There was a huge list of reasons that you could be put into one of these lunatic asylums. And one of the reasons was actually called religious fanaticism. So if you think of that in a little summary, when it comes to this theory for the inheritors, is that after the millennial kingdom, the rest of the dead could have been resurrected. They would have gone to the camp of the saints, possibly, and those who just kind of lived through the millennial kingdom would then have gone on to become the inheritors. And could it be possible that they had their children and babies taken from them and they were placed into asylums if they refused to keep quiet about it? I think that that is very likely the case. But what I will say is that I'm still having an issue with the whole idea that people would be resurrected after the millennial kingdom, and then the short season happens for however long it is. It could be 250. I've heard people say 400 years that the short season could be. So then people would have died in that time. And I'm just thinking again, I can't see all of these resurrections happening over and over and over again. Now, does it mean that they don't? No, because I'm definitely not a Bible scholar, but that's not how I'm reading the Bible. So let me just share with you how I am starting to believe it possibly may have happened or will happen. I pray for discernment every day, and I have been pondering this for years. I've honestly been thinking about it for years, but recently I've been thinking about it more than, whoops, wrong one. But I've been thinking about it more than I haven't been thinking about it. It's been permeating my mind recently. And I just am having a really tough time with all of these separate resurrections and everything. So what I've been starting to think is, what if after the millennial kingdom ended, what if right after it was finished, the rest of the dead were not immediately resurrected? Because that's not what Revelation 20 actually says. Let's go back and see what that says. Let's just read the entire chapter of Revelation 20, because it's not long, and it will help to make sense, at least with what I'm thinking right now. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So in my mind, I'm thinking those are the people who died during the tribulation period. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Now, I want to point out that it just says the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. It doesn't say immediately after. It just says they didn't come to life until then. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. And that is speaking of people, I believe, the martyrs from the tribulation. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So we keep having this thought that the rest of the dead, immediately at the very end of the 1,000 years, that the rest of the dead are immediately resurrected. But that's not what it says. It just says that they are resurrected after that. So instead of thinking that there was the resurrection at the beginning of the 1,000 years with the martyrs, and then we have the one after, but then we would also have to have the resurrection here at the white throne judgment, because it tells us that there is another resurrection here. And at first I thought, okay, well, that is all of the people who died during the short season. But what I'm actually starting to believe is that after the 1,000 years are ended, that the rest of the dead actually will not be resurrected until the white throne judgment. That's what I'm starting to believe. So the rest of the dead, in my opinion, if we are still in the short season now, have not been resurrected yet. And the inheritors would have been the survivors of the millennial kingdom. And I'm fully expecting that it would be at the white throne judgment that everyone else would be resurrected at that time. So I know that the idea that most of Revelation has already happened and that we are in the short season, basically just waiting for the final judgment and for Satan to be thrown into the lake of fire, and then for the new heavens and the new earth to come, that is referred to as partial preterism. And I have actually started looking into full preterism because I find it very, very interesting. I still have some issues with it, but I wanted to share some things with you that I found on a website. Someone recommended a channel, a YouTube channel, and I went on their website and found a lot of really good information. And again, I'm not fully sold on it, but they have very good videos. I will leave a link to the website and also a link to their YouTube channel, and you can check it out for yourself. And I'm certainly not uh, an expert in full preterism because, like I said, I don't fully agree with it, at least, or maybe possibly don't understand it as of yet. But I do want to share this regarding the idea that the resurrection already happened. Full preterists believe that the resurrection happened in 66 AD. Now, what they believe, though, is that this was not the first resurrection, but this in 66 AD was the rest of the dead resurrection. In the full preterist point of view, at least from what I'm understanding from this website here, it is the the resurrection that is referred to in Revelation 20, the people who survived and didn't take the mark. That was actually referring to when Jesus was crucified. The Gospels tell us, I think it was Matthew that tells us that there were tombs that opened up. Let's go check that out. So this is Matthew 27, and this is starting with verse 52. Now, this is speaking of when Jesus died on the cross. Then it says, the tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So it is the full preterist view that these are the people that when Jesus ascended, that they then ascended with him, and that is when they actually started their reign with him, and that is what that is referring to. So if we go back to the website, this historical account that I'm going to read to you right now is actually referring to the rest of the dead. So I'll just start right here. It says, let me just read this paragraph. Jesus promised the resurrection in his disciples' lifetime. So is there any historical record showing it occurred on time? Suppose the saints come from an invisible place, Hades, end up in another hidden place, heaven, and are resurrected in spiritual bodies that may or may not be visible. In that case, it is much easier to find a fulfillment in history, because full preterists, they believe that everything has already been fulfilled in history, and they are very thorough in telling you specifically what events they are. So in that case, it is much easier to find a fulfillment in history. Fortunately, a semi-visible event occurred in 66 AD, the same year that angelic armies arrived on the clouds. And I did do a video about that a few years ago. That yes, in AD 66, there are historical accounts of angelic armies in the clouds, just like it says. So it says, when the Jewish revolt began, Nero was in Greece building a canal. Concerning the construction of this waterway, Cassius Dio writes, when the first workers touched the earth, blood spouted from it, groans and bellowings were heard, and many phantoms appeared. Nero himself thereupon grasped a mattock, and by throwing up some of the soil, fairly compelled the rest to imitate him. In recording this event, Suetonius indicates that as Nero broke the ground, the sound of a trumpet was heard. The fact that a trumpet was heard at the time in which the dead appear to have been raised clearly fulfills 1 Corinthians 15:52, for the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable. Josephus wrote, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Moreover, at that feast, which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was, to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place they felt a quaking and heard a great noise, and after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, let us remove hence. So I'm just going to skim down here to this summary. It says, the above accounts align with the anticipated resurrection. The ground shook, possibly indicating bodies emerging from their graves. Although these bodies were invisible or semi-visible, their voices were heard, consistent with the biblical description of resurrection bodies. This event took place 2 weeks after the vision of angelic armies on the clouds, fulfilling the expectation that the dead would rise when Christ returns. And these events unfolded in 66 AD, within the generation of the disciples, fulfilling the condition that the resurrection was imminent. And yes, we do have multiple verses that certainly does seem like the resurrection was going to be in the time of, in the generation of his disciples. And I always kind of thought of it as the resurrection at the beginning of the 1,000 years. But if you read through this, they believe that all of it, the entire book of Revelation was meant to be believed to have happened in the generation of his disciples. So, and it tells us here, throughout history, Christians have debated the destination of believers after death and the nature of the resurrection. Most people believe that when a Christian dies, their spirit goes to heaven while their body waits for a future resurrection. But some, like the early church leader Irenaeus, argued that the saints couldn't go to heaven until the future resurrection. Instead, they are waiting in a place called Hades. While these ideas contain partial truth, they do not fully consider the biblical promise that Jesus would return in the 1st century to raise the dead. 2 Timothy 4:1 says Jesus Christ, who is about to judge the living and dead at his appearing and his kingdom. Matthew 16:27 says, for the Son of Man is about to come. So this gives a sense of urgency, and then he will reward each one according to his deeds. Acts 24:15 says there is about to be a resurrection of the dead, both of righteous and unrighteous. And 1 Peter 4:4-7 says, and they malign you, but they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. The end of all things is at hand. At hand means it's coming soon. So you might be wondering why I'm bringing that up in a video about the short season reset. And it's basically because I'm just letting you know that there is a theory. There are believers who believe that we're not even in the short season anymore, that everything has already been completed that is in the book of Revelation. And again, I will leave a link in the description box to the website. I only got to get through maybe a few, it goes chapter by chapter on the website. And so I only got to go through a few of them so far. it's fascinating, but again, I'm just going to say I do have some misgivings about it, some things that I'm like, okay, that I don't get that. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because that is another possibility according to some people. But to me, I believe that it is most likely that we are in the short season and the rest of the dead will be resurrected before the white throne judgment. That's where I'm at right now, and it's not set in stone. So anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work, you can actually join my channel membership. I finally got one started. So I will leave a link in the description for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.